There is a congressionally funded institute called the U.S. Institute of Peace. It's not a Dennis Kucinich Department of Peace replacing the Pentagon thing. It is essentially a think tank, an independent, publicly funded, nonpartisan institution. Congress founded it in 1984 to work on resolving conflicts and preventing wars and promoting stability after wars and stuff like that. It was probably a good idea in 1984. It's probably a really good idea right now. We could use that sort of thinking right now. Well, the U.S. Institute of Peace has just issued a new report called The Future of Afghanistan. It is an indictment of the Bush administration's conduct of the Afghanistan war. They delivered the report today at a conference that Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice and Joint Chiefs Chairman Admiral Mike Mullen conveniently pulled out of, even though they'd previously been due to address the conference. But the man now in charge of both the Afghanistan war and the Iraq war, the head of CENTCOM, did not duck out and was there to hear it. That man is General David Petraeus. The report accuses the president of 7 years of short-term thinking, a lack of any coherent strategy. It says that President Bush did not commit the soldiers, funds, or political attention needed to win the war or even to really understand how Afghanistan works. The report's main editor told the Associated Press, quote, "The Bush administration has had all but 8 months of its entire tenure to stabilize Afghanistan. And here it is January, and one of the top foreign policy priorities for the Obama administration is to stabilize Afghanistan." Now, the common wisdom on Afghanistan, from President-elect Barack Obama to staying on Defense Secretary Bob Gates and on down the line, is that more American troops in Afghanistan are the answer. Democrats and Republicans all together now. Iraq war bad, Afghanistan war good. Pour in more troops to Afghanistan and all better real quick. Definitely not a Soviet-style empire-ending quagmire. Now, the more experts I talk to about Afghanistan, the more I am starting to realize that this common wisdom about Afghanistan might be becoming less common. Maybe there is not a consensus about what to do in Afghanistan. Maybe there is no good war here. Here to try to talk me down is Steve Clemons of the New America Foundation. He writes the influential blog, The Washington Note. Steve, it's nice to see you. Thanks for being on the show tonight.
Great to be with you, Rachel. It's going to be tough to talk you down since I largely agree with you.
You know, I keep running into that problem. Tell me this, though. Is there a Republican-Democrat split on what to do about Afghanistan? Is there a political divide on this issue, or is there a political consensus that sending more troops is the right next move?
Among strategic elites in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, there's a consensus that throwing a few more brigades or more is what both parties would like to see done. Under his breath, Bob Gates has sort of often said the costs of Iraq are the mess in Afghanistan, and he and others have been talking in military terms. I think Gates has begun to shift, but a number of them have been talking about applying more military pressure to try and solve the problems of Afghanistan. I think what's happening is other analysts are beginning to say this is looking a lot like LBJ and the build-up in the Vietnam, and it's a replay in some senses of what the Soviets went through with Afghanistan. And so there is some erosion in that group.
I know that when you talk to the Russians now about their experience in Afghanistan, they will admit, yeah, they were there for 10 years, but about 6 years in, they started to think about leaving. We're now in year 7, and we're thinking about escalating. But when you describe a split here between elites and sort of other non-elite analysts, it makes me wonder if, as we have this change of government, change in administrations, are some of the non-elite analysts who are questioning this common wisdom getting elevated into decision-making positions in the Obama administration?
Well, I hate to separate between non-elite, and I think it's more of the people who are part of the traditional strategic crowd that have been advocates of applying more military pressure, because it was a narrative that they felt that, we went to war in Afghanistan to try to go after bin Laden and al-Qaeda, and then we got distracted and withdrew forces and resources and moved those into Iraq, and thus, lo and behold, the stability we thought within Afghanistan fell apart. So it lends itself to a narrative that only returning troops back to this mess will solve it. And that's just unfortunately not true. I think what's happening is people are saying logically, this is a nation with a lot of feudal tribes that have been for thousands of years governing and managing their situation in sort of a consensus-driven arrangement. And we've been trying to apply a framework of democracy there. and of change that the place isn't ready to accept yet. And we've been neglecting it. The other thing people don't understand is this country is about 2.5 times the land mass of Iraq and has more than 50% more population. And so there's a real chance that the hopes and dreams of the Obama administration, as one friend of mine said and Katrina vanden Heuvel wrote about once, could be buried in Afghanistan. And somebody needs to begin blowing the whistle on this.
What's the goal in Afghanistan? I mean, not the pie in the sky goal, not the, I imagine that, it looks like a Jeffersonian democracy and everybody rides a unicorn. Right. But what's the actual on the ground achievable this generation goal that the United States has for Afghanistan?
Well, as many of these sort of postmodern challenges in the 21st century we have, the goal keeps changing. I think it used to be to go after radical Arab jihadists and al-Qaeda. Increasingly, you see other people now talking about challenging the Taliban. The Taliban are an enormous part of the population of Afghanistan, and I think the government largely has been careful of identifying them as the real enemy. But I think it raises a real question of which army, which forces are we really trying to topple in our NATO deployments there. I think for other people, it's trying to build civil society, rule of law, a functioning democracy, rights for women, and there's a big agenda there. But I'll repeat something that Dana Priest of the Washington Post wrote today on an online web chat. She said, she's increasingly of the view that we're going to probably have to come to terms with the Taliban and just find a way to tunnel out women, because it will be an awful reality for them. But otherwise, this is going to be a never-ending war. Richard Holbrooke, who is going to be Barack Obama's envoy for Afghanistan and Pakistan, gave a speech this last year called America's Longest War and saw it going on indefinitely. That ought to concern us.
This is not a time for consensus, in other words. Steve Clemons of the New America Foundation writes the Washington Note blog, which everybody should read every day. Steve, thank you for coming on the show tonight. I really appreciate it.
Always great to be with you, Rachel.